It's Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, August 16th, 2024. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. In Los Angeles, I am John Ramey. Inflation hits a 3-year low in the United States. The protesters that ousted the Bangladeshi prime minister attack supporters of the deposed leader. Thailand's top court fires their prime minister. And the Ukrainian military makes a big move into Russia. Hi, Sam.
Hi, John.
We are actually taping this on Thursday, August 15th because of our schedules. So fingers crossed that nothing too major changes. If it does, obviously, we'll either insert something or re-record. So let's start with inflation, Sam.
Okay.
I don't see any parades yet. There are no parades. I haven't seen anybody like uncorking champagne, but reporting from CNBC indicates or says right here, the Consumer Price Index, which is a broad-based measure of prices for goods and services, increased 0.2% for the month, putting the 12-month inflation rate at 2.9%. That is the lowest 12-month inflation rate since March of 2021, which of course
3 years, yeah.
is the and that's the start of this inflationary cycle.
Yes.
So inflation has been defeated. Congratulations. Handshakes all around.
Well,
VI Day, Sam. It's VI Day.
Yeah, if you say so. But man, you're right, though. I not only have...
but it just clearly doesn't feel that way, and that's not how it will be interpreted. But on paper, it's kind of true.
Well, it's all very good news. Let's put it that way. I mean, and not only have there been no parades, but nobody is hanging their heads in embarrassment either, because 2 weeks ago, when we got the weak jobs report that showed only 114,000 jobs added in July, people just started flipping out like we were.
So did the markets.
Yes, on the verge of some catastrophic economic downturn, even though it's just like, well, we just added jobs. Okay, not very many, but it's not like unemployment is rising. And actually part of the stock market turmoil was because of the coincident unwinding of the carry trade in Japan, which I don't care to go into in very much detail.
It's a little in the weeds, but yeah.
I mean, it's actually not that complicated, but it's just one of these sort of gimmicky things that financial people do to make money.
So they figured out the yen had a much lower interest rate, and so that kind of...
Yes, except then the Bank of Japan raised interest rates, and so then the carry trade suddenly becomes much less compelling. And so, the yen, the interest rates had been very low in Japan forever, and so the idea that they would go up caused this long-standing trade to unwind. And so by which time it had gotten very large. Anyway, so the markets go crazy. People started saying absolutely crazy thing. I saw this one guy on CNBC. This guy was a professor emeritus at the Wharton Business School.
He should know better.
Yeah, arguably the most highly rated business school in the United States, and he's a professor emeritus. I think his name was Jeremy Siegel. I don't quite remember. This was a couple of weeks ago already. And he was saying that he thought the Federal Reserve should institute an emergency rate cut. And he said that even if they don't do that, at their next meeting, the Federal Reserve should cut interest rates by 0.75 of a point, and then another 0.75 of a point at the following meeting a month later. And I'm sitting there watching this, and I'm going, I'm sorry, this guy's professor emeritus, and I'm a bozo on a podcast, but that's nuts, right? And actually, the commentator, I think it was Joe Kernan, who was very even-tempered, actually. And Kernan's a pretty conservative guy, actually. He's not at all averse to Fed bashing. But he said, okay, but what do you think is actually going to happen? like, thanks, Joe Kernan, right? I mean, that's absolutely right. Where are you getting this from?
Well, I'll tell you what's happened. 6 winning days in a row for the S&P 500.
That's right.
The market on this Thursday closed above 40,000. I mean, so since that calamity, air quotes,
of the jobs report, yes.
Right. The markets have been just fine. And as it turns out, inflation's at its lowest rate.
Yeah, and then today It turns out that retail sales rose by a very small amount last month also. So this, I mean, it's not perfect, right? But you've got inflation falling while retail sales are picking up, right? That seems to be, at both figures, very moderate. That seems to be just about right.
But
And
what
so,
about the SOM indicator, man? What about
yeah,
that? What
I mean,
about
it's silly, right? And so, but again, none of these people who are freaking out are issuing any sort of mea culpa whatsoever, right? I saw someone today saying that they still think the Fed should cut by half a point next month, but
I mean,
that's an
this would be
out.
rash.
That's yeah, that's what I think. But again, we're bozos on a podcast. What do we know, right? We're not financial professionals. But there seems to be like those people who think that the rate cut should be 0.5%, 0.75%, or whatever. Those are now outlier opinions. And there seems to be a consensus forming that the Fed will cut by a quarter point next month, and then after that, we'll see what happens. Which, I mean, again, just to a layman like myself, that seems to be the right idea, right?
Yeah, that's normal and gradual. And
Yeah, and because if you cut by half a point and then suddenly inflation picks up, then you have to backtrack, right? And that's embarrassing, and it makes you look like you don't know what you're doing, right? If you cut by a quarter point and inflation picks up a little bit, you can just stay still, right? And so I think that's probably what's going to happen. That is a quarter point rate cut. However, especially with the retail sales from today, I think there's a non-zero chance that they don't move interest rates at all in the next meeting. I don't think that's going to happen, but nobody seems to be discussing this possibility, which I think is a very real one. And again, I would be surprised if they do it, but I wouldn't be very surprised. Let's just put it that way. And I think it's worth remembering also that when the Federal Open Market Committee decides in their meetings what interest rate policy going forward is going to be, it's sort of like they're trying to hit a moving target with a bow and arrow. So it's not just that you have to try to guess where the target's going to be, but you have to factor in the time it takes for the arrow to travel to that spot that you're aiming at. And it doesn't actually help that this whole process plays out in slow motion, right? That might actually make it worse. And so the Fed has to be sort of forward looking, trying to guess where things are going to go. And so far, it seems like they've done a pretty good job. A lot of people said that they've been late on anticipating inflation, which I think is correct, and they might be a little late now. But the case for them being late now is weaker this week than it was a couple weeks ago.
All right. So just to recap, monetary policy is not civil rights, and incrementalism is okay, says Sam Park.
That's right.
The Fed meets September 17th and September 18th, so it's about a month from now. Just to point out, though, that I am not in the camp that thinks it's at all helpful to talk to regular people about record high stock markets, record low unemployment rates, and inflation is back down to where it was before this spike in inflation. Because what do most people talk about when they talk about inflation, Sam? Energy and food costs, and those are not factored in to most of the inflation metrics we look at. And I heard a number, and in fact, whenever I talk to my brother or when I talk to you about inflation, what we talk about? We talk about grocery prices.
Yes,
grocery prices are up 25% since the start of the pandemic. I heard that on NPR reporting on this, in fact, story today. That is an astounding number. And
it really
some
is.
of that, and Sam, some of that is corporate profiteering.
Some of it is, yes. But as we've discussed before, the way to nip that in the bud is just through monetary policy, right? Once inflation begins, people sort of take advantage, right? And they say, oh, well, if prices are going up, then I can raise my prices. And it's not that no one will notice, but no one will take it out on my company more than they take it out on my competitors. And so inflation acts as an incentive for bad actors. And so if you want to stop corporate price gouging, the best macro level solution is just through monetary policy employed by the Federal Reserve to bring down inflation and give companies less places to hide, right? Because once prices start to fall, then companies start to feel that they need to compete with any of their competitors who are lowering prices.
Like
Right?
McDonald's cutting their prices.
That's right. And in fact, there was a story on CNBC today that was below the fold that wasn't, highly featured. But some grocery prices, especially in the produce area, are actually falling. Right? It's not just that the prices have stopped rising; they're actually going down, only very, very slightly. Right? But that's good news too. Right? Where if companies start to feel that they need to lower prices to remain competitive. The other thing I would say is that retail sales rose last month very slightly after taking a surprise dip in June. And some of the sales that rose most in July were things like restaurants. And I think in some ways it might just be because July is peak vacation season.
You're out of town.
Right? But if as all the reports say, consumers have been tightening their belts a lot this year, then maybe people in June were saying, I've got my vacation coming up. I need to cut back a little bit this month, right? So we'll see what happens. August and September, things might start to go in different directions. But it does seem as though things are going very moderately right now, which is good news. The last thing you want is lots of crazy increases and or decreases in various segments of the marketplace.
Can we move to Bangladesh? An update on Bangladesh.
Sure.
Okay. Al Jazeera reporting hundreds of student protesters and political activists vowing to guard Bangladesh's student-led, quote, revolution have attacked supporters of ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and prevented them from reaching the house of her father, the assassinated independence leader, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. As we tape this today, Thursday, August 15th, is the anniversary of his assassination. And it had been a holiday, but the new caretaker government and the leader, Muhammad Yunus, had called off the holiday. But there had been a rally held by Hasina, the deposed leader's supporters, and the protesters that ousted Hasina attacked them with no police in sight, bamboo sticks, iron rods, and pipes. So that's wild.
Yeah, and it's
revolution, counter-revolution. I mean, yeah,
it's very concerning. Yeah. There is I mean, it would be an exaggeration to say that there's a sort of Jacobin element developing here, but it's certainly a thing.
Sam, who are the Jacobins?
They were the hardcore French revolutionaries, essentially.
The radicals.
Right? Yes, the very radical French revolutionaries.
But they were the guillotine enthusiasts, right?
Yes, and there are signs in Bangladesh of that sort of dynamic developing. Right, it's too early to say that it's happening. But another thing that the protesters have been doing is protesting outside the Supreme Court. And in the past week, I can't remember which is higher. They have a high court and they have a Supreme Court. I think the high court is actually higher than the Supreme Court, which doesn't make any sense to me. But that, either way, numerous high-level judges have resigned in the previous week. Now, they were almost certainly cronies of Sheikh Hasina and her Awami League party, because that was one of the ways that Hasina managed to exert authoritarian control over the country, was by stacking the courts with loyalists to her party. And so many of these judges certainly were those loyalists. But the problem is you can't have people just running away because there's a mob outside their office, right? There needs to be some, assessment of, who's corrupt, who's guilty of this or that, instead of just, I was a friend of Sheikh Hasina, I gotta go, right? That this is not an orderly transfer, right? And that's what we want in a democratic system, is an orderly transfer of power. And it seems like that's not really happening. And you mentioned that there were no police on site at the protest. And part of the reason for that is that many police went on strike because they were the main ones who were gunning down the protesters and otherwise repressing them before Sheikh Hasina.
Killed more than 300.
That's right. And it was mainly them and not the army that was doing this. So many police officers have been victims of reprisal attacks. Now, you might say that's perfectly justified, but if all the police go on strike, then you're in trouble. To their credit, some of the protesters have taken to just directing traffic on the street, right? There's lots of video that you can see of them, telling cars.
Essentially, sorry to interrupt you, but essentially, the protesters that ousted Hasina are now kind of the de facto police force.
Well, but so far, all we know about is them directing traffic. They're not solving crimes, right?
No, they're either directing traffic or attacking political opponents.
Yeah, and so
Boy Scouts or Jacobins.
Yeah, and so it's very concerning. And so again, we're going to have to keep a close eye on Bangladesh. Extremely important link in the clothing supply chain, right? We all have clothes in our closets that were made in Bangladesh. I guarantee it. It's especially concerning in light of, as we've mentioned before, the civil war in Myanmar next door, which has been going on for a couple of years. And we haven't talked about it at all in this podcast, except in passing, which we're going to do again right now. But I think one thing that we should say is that the main reason we've never talked about Myanmar is because, in a weirdly refreshing way, it's just a civil war. That is, it's not anybody else's proxy war. There's no foreign involvement on either side. And so its geopolitical implications thus far have been very small.
As opposed to the number of African civil wars.
Yeah, that's right. In the war in Sudan, there are definitely other countries that are arming this or that side. Whereas in Myanmar, that's just simply not the case at all. It's horrible. I mean, it's a terrible war. And it's wildly destabilized the country. But so you've got Bangladesh, Myanmar next door, and then just past Myanmar, if you're continuing on in the same direction, is Thailand, which we might turn to now.
What a coincidence.
Yeah.
Dateline Bangkok, the Associated Press reporting. Thailand's constitutional court, that is the top court, the Supreme Court, removed Prime Minister Srettha Thavisin from office over an ethical violation on Wednesday, further shaking up Thai politics after ordering the dissolution of the main opposition party a week ago. That was Move Forward. Was that the party?
That was the Move Forward party. Yes,
they won an election and then couldn't form a government.
Yes, they've apparently stopped moving forward.
Right. I actually love a political party that is like a declarative sentence. Move Forward,
yes,
right?
I think that's pretty good, right?
Yeah. So anyway, Move Forward won an election, couldn't form a government. Thavisin ends up being the prime minister. And honestly, on like what is we might call it ticky-tack foul in basketball, like it's a technicality about this ethics violation.
Yeah, it's a pretty routine bribery case.
Yeah, this is a patently political move by the high court there. And so it is interesting, in Thailand, you have three institutions that outrank the elected body.
That's right.
As far as political power, you've got the monarch, you've got the army, and you've got the judiciary. And they've basically now added another prime minister, another elected prime minister to the dustbin of history. It seems that if you are not anointed by the military, you're not long for the position of prime minister in Thailand.
I think that's absolutely right. That's certainly the conclusion we have to reach. And it just seems like the army did this just to demonstrate that they could. Right? There's no real reason why Thavisin, shouldn't have been prime minister, right, as opposed to somebody else, right? And it looks like somebody else.
Coalition governments happen.
Yeah, and it looks like somebody else from Thavisin's party, the Pheu Thai party, is going to be prime minister anyway. I have to wonder, actually, for instance, I think they would have abolished the Move Forward party anyway. Right. That's, they clearly wanted to send a message to Move Forward and say, no, you can't do this. There wasn't enough that they were blocked from forming a government last year after the election, right? They were just saying, no, we're going to dissolve your party,
You
right?
know what the Move Forward Party was guilty of? They they proposed
Les
an
Majesté, right?
yeah, they opposed an amendment to the law against defaming the
The monarch, yeah,
Majesté, the royal
yeah,
family of Thailand.
yes, and that law is, I think, probably the most onerous lèse majesté law in the world. I mean, every monarchy has such laws to one degree or another. Perhaps
I
Britain
wouldn't know
doesn't.
about that, Sam, as a free American.
Yeah, well, of course you wouldn't. But for instance, in Thailand, anybody, for instance, if you and I were both Thai citizens, I could file a complaint against you for lèse majesté. And if you and I just heard you say, "Oh, the king sucks," right? I mean, any citizen can do this in Thailand, and that's just crazy. I mean, it's a recipe for political persecution, and so, uh, and yeah, as you say, that's why the Move Forward Party was dissolved.
So
And
they just wanted to defang that retrograde law. What lèse majesté is the
yes,
term.
that's right. Yes,
And so they dissolve a party that won an election like less than a year ago.
yes,
And then the Constitutional Court, a week later, kicks out the prime minister. I mean,
yeah. I
we
mean,
talk about the Supreme Court in this country and a judicial kind of overreach. I mean, this is real. Although
yeah,
I should point
absolutely.
out it was a 5-4 ruling. Like, not that it matters, but I guess it's interesting it wasn't unanimous.
Yeah, that is interesting. I would agree. But the point is that
Like
that
4 out of the 9 wanted to keep the prime minister.
yeah, and it's not like Thailand is only a military dictatorship. They did have this election, which Move Forward did win, right? With a plurality, that is. And so it's not like it's all a sham democracy. It's just that they do go through the motions of democracy, but then when the democratic processes end up with a result that the military doesn't like, they're like, nah, we're not doing that. Right?
Reset. They
Yeah,
hit the reset button.
absolutely. And so if we put all these things together, right, with Bangladesh on the verge of possibly complete catastrophic turmoil, right? Myanmar in pretty much complete catastrophic turmoil, and now this in Thailand, we've got the entire eastern side of the Bay of Bengal in some degree of democratic distress or another. And that's a big place. That's probably all told about 250 million people.
Yeah.
Now, again, most of them are in Bangladesh, but that's still a large geographical area in the global south with a very large number of people. And so these things are just disturbing, each one of them by itself. But if you put them in the aggregate in one particular region, it's definitely a subject of concern.
And as if that wasn't enough, Sam Park, Dateline Sumy, Ukraine. This is reporting from the Washington Post. Ukraine solidified its control over the parts of Russia's Kursk region that it has taken in a 10-day offensive, announcing Thursday the appointment of a military commander to manage the area as well as new battlefield successes. In the city of Sumy, which is not far from where Ukrainian forces surprised the world by storming into Russia, wounded soldiers are also describing the operations in Belgorod region to the south. This suggests an even larger scale to the offensive, which is changing perceptions abroad that Ukraine has been on the losing end of this war. That, again, is reporting from the Washington Post. So is this the Battle of the Bulge, or is this actually like a turning point in this war and Ukraine is maybe winning more than they were getting credit for?
I would say no to all.
It's hard to say, right?
Well, okay, I'll tell you. I think that this is mainly for propaganda purposes, right?
Really?
If you look at the map, then the amount of territory that they've actually taken is substantial. But in terms of the total size of the battlefield in Ukraine, very small, right? The idea that you've heard bandied about, I'm sure, that they're going to trade this territory in some future peace negotiation. I mean, maybe they will, but how much could they really get back for it? And so now, I've seen so many retired generals and colonels saying, "Oh, this is a huge blow to Putin." No, it really isn't. All right. And part of the reason that many people think that Ukraine did this was to try and get the Russians to move their forces away from the front lines in the eastern Donetsk region of Ukraine, which is where the main fighting has been going on all year, and move them up to Kursk to try and fend off this Ukrainian offensive. To some degree, that's happened, but the defense minister of Lithuania reported to Ukraine this week that actually the Russians are bringing their troops in from Kaliningrad up on the Baltic Sea, right? So they're mainly reinforcing Kursk with troops from other parts of Russia and not from the Ukrainian front lines. So if their goal was to try and get Russia to redeploy their forces, it probably hasn't worked. And I'm sure, John, you've also heard some commentators say, this is the first time anyone has sent forces across the border of Russia since World War II, right? And that's true. It is. But the reason that's true is because sending your forces into Russia is a bad idea. It's always been a bad idea. And I'm not convinced it's not still a bad idea today. Now, having said that, Ukraine has also launched their largest drone offensive of the war in the past couple of days. And so if you couple that with the offensive in Kursk, okay, now we might be in business. This might be a more decisive campaign. I mean, we didn't want to talk about this last week because we're just a couple days old, and I wasn't sure it could be sustained, and I'm still not, because the further they go in, the greater chance they have of outrunning their supply lines.
That never happens when you're invading Russia.
Exactly, right? And so...
who would think of such a thing?
And, well, I did, and I'm like, who am I, right? Again, bozo on a podcast, right? And so we'll have to see how this develops. The drone offensive, I think, is just as significant, if not more so, because this is one of the areas in which Ukraine has something closer to parity with the Russian forces. Russia has so many more people than Ukraine. They can reinforce this with conscripts if they'd have to. Mind you, the forces that were not quite guarding the border between Ukraine and the Sumy region of Ukraine and the Kursk region of Russia, they were conscripts, and they did not do a good job. And there are Russian military mothers who were sending letters to, they actually came up with a petition this week and said, please do not conscript our sons. They're not trained for this. They're not equipped for this, which it's surprising that they were able to, or willing to do this so openly. And so that's part of the reason this was done, was to make Putin look bad, which it certainly does. Okay, it's to say, well, okay, you say everything's going according to plan, but you're 2.5 years, and now people are crossing the border into Russia for the first time. How is that going according to plan? Right. So it does make Putin look bad. But in terms of actual military success, I'm not so sure. Meanwhile, again, to mitigate that, one of the drone targets was up near Moscow. In fact, further away from Ukraine than Moscow is. And so if they can sort of scramble with this, I think part of it is to just see if they can hold on to this territory for another 6 months, right? And if, just in case Donald Trump becomes president again, they've got something to go to the table with,
right? Some
however
leverage.
Small, right?
Yeah. One thing I will just point out, in having studied history and wars, and there have been essentially, I guess, 3 wars involving the United States that I've consumed. You know, you've got the Gulf War, the invasion of Afghanistan, and the invasion of Iraq, and also now this Ukraine-Russia war. You know, when you read about wars in history, it's tidy. It's an even, linear flow of events. Wars in real time, it's chaos.
It's a mess. Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, we have more reporting and more streams of information. Gaza, for example, like, it's just, you cannot form a narrative. And you can see, I mean, just the reporting from the Washington Post, which I have no reason to suspect would be anything but the most ethical and sourced. Well, they're on the ground. They're desperate for a clean narrative, and you just can't really get one.
Well, and another problem with that is that so many of the talking heads, especially these retired generals and colonels like this, they're obviously cheerleaders for Ukraine. And you know what? So am I.
That's fine.
I want Ukraine to win, right? But David Petraeus said this is a huge blow to Putin. And I'm sorry. It's just like, for all the reasons I've just laid out.
It could be. It could not be.
Yeah, I'm just having trouble seeing it that way. That's all.
What a week, Sam. My goodness. Imagine if we hadn't taped a day early. Who knows?
God knows is right. But, next week we might be giving peace a chance. There might actually be peace talks in the Middle East. American military personnel came out today and said, look, Israel has achieved every military outcome it possibly can in Gaza. It's time to wrap this up. I think that's great that they did this. And also yesterday, peace talks were convened in Switzerland to try and bring the war in Sudan to an end, which is a catastrophe, right? It's the most horrible thing happening on Earth right now, which apart from that, obviously, Earth is just wall-to-wall fun. But if that can have any impact, it would be a great thing. We'll see.
All right, that'll do it for us on Working for Crusoe. We'll be back next week. He's Sam. I'm John. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.